In today's conversation, I speak to Jane Harrington, who is the Vice Chancellor and CEO of the University of Greenwich. We talk about maverick leadership and how to be a maverick leader in education. Jane shares her background in academia, rising from researcher to senior leadership over 20 years. I ask her about her non-linear career path, to which Jane attributes staying true to herself and gaining diverse experiences through openness to opportunities. In this conversation, along with the 5 key takeaways, we discuss how to overcome challenges and build confidence. We also look at exactly what it is that builds resilience and confidence through failure. I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organisation. And today, our guest is Jane Harrington. How are you doing, Jane?
I'm great, Jude. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Now, Jane, I've always wondered this. What makes you get up and dance when the music comes on?
Oh, I think it's just something internally in me, actually, that I'm actually always really excited about life, about what's going to be the next thing, what's going to happen, and and actually I love dancing. I want to be on Strictly. That's my little secret. And so actually I get up every day and just think, actually, I just sort of, in my head, I just sort of think, okay, I've got this and to do. And actually then think about, oh, great, and that will lead to this, and that might lead to this. So I think it's an internal thing. I'm a very positive person by nature. And so I think internally I'm just excited by what will happen next.
Yeah, that life itself is a dance.
Absolutely. Yeah,
excellent. So tell us a little bit more about you.
Okay, well, I'm currently the Vice Chancellor and Chief Executive Officer of University of Greenwich, which is a university with about 20,000 students in the UK and about 15,000 students studying abroad at any one time. And we've got 3 campuses, and my leadership journey started it has been in universities, actually, and it started in a university, and I was a researcher and I became a lecturer. And then within 2 years, I was running some programs, and it's really been from that point onwards. So about 20 years I've been in senior leadership positions.
Brilliant, thank you. Is it normal then to go from being a lecturer to running programs in the path you've taken, or have you taken more of a maverick route?
I think you can safely say I haven't taken a very linear and easy route. I mean, for a whole range of reasons, actually. I mean, partly I stayed in one institution for a very long time, which I loved, actually. I really liked it, and I got lots of promotions there, and it was great. But also, I had a family, and it would have been hard to move, and I had a partner who wasn't able to work. So I needed to be the stability, if that makes sense. And so I decided, because I get bored very easily, and I thought, well, what am I going to do? And actually, I don't even know if this was conscious. I think as I reflect back, it's more apparent. But at the time, I just thought I need to have an interesting career and an interesting life for me, to keep me excited, to keep me dancing. And so basically I just took on any role that was offered. And I moved sideways. I took on things that would broaden my remit at times. Sometimes I narrowed it. And I just basically exposed myself to as many opportunities as I could. And I also made a policy of being really clear that I wanted to understand other universities. And so I didn't become institutionalized, if that makes sense. So to give you an example, I sat on the Association of Business Schools committee. I was deputy chair, and then I chaired their teaching and learning committee. And I did that so I could understand what happened in other business schools, because I was running a business school at the time. And I think that was really important, because it meant that I actually, when I did make the move, and I made the move to come here to be the Vice Chancellor at Greenwich, it didn't feel like a big shock.
Yeah.
It felt like something that was just a natural progression. And so, but I have had times when I haven't got posts. I've had times when people have said, well, actually, I've been told in the past when I was younger, I was too feisty. Someone said I'd never get on because I spoke my mind and I was honest. Well, I think they're quite good traits, but and
you know what? That is so common with Maverick leaders, because as you know, I define Mavericks as willfully independent people. But that propensity to have high integrity, tell it as it is often not liked. How did you deal with that challenge, though?
Well, at the time, I was really annoyed actually by the person who said it to me, but also I have to tell you that this was somebody who would start drinking at midday and behave really badly. So I actually remember looking at him and thinking, do you know what? I really think my model is better than yours, and it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because do you curb your behaviour for someone else? And I think you have to stay true to yourself. And I think if I was, we often say, what would you say to your younger self? And to my younger self, I would have said, don't worry, it's okay to be you. And I think that actually that's something that takes you a while to learn and realise. So I think I did have 2 or probably 3, maybe even 5 years where I think I floundered, if I'm honest, where I wasn't sure whether I could be myself, whether myself was a good enough person to be, or whether I had to adapt. And actually, I realised ultimately there was a moment when somebody really challenged me in what I was doing, and I thought, do you know what? If being me isn't okay, then it's not the right place for me to be. And actually that helped me. It gave me some internal confidence.
Oh, I totally get that, because I remember going through that period of angst where it's almost like everything that you believe in is wrong, but what you believe in should be right. Like, you shouldn't have a blame culture. You should stand up and be accountable. You should point out things that are wrong if you're there to fix it. And it's like people saying, don't rock the boat. And you're like, didn't you employ me to rock the boat? I don't understand.
Absolutely. Yeah. And actually, do you know what? The best thing for me was when I became an associate dean of a faculty, so second in command of a faculty, which would be, for anyone who doesn't really know what universities are like, it would be like deputy head of a school. And I got that job, and the person who appointed me was the vice chancellor of the university I was at then. And he came up to me after the interview, and because I was always really nervous about whether I was at that time, like you're saying, that whole angst about was I okay? And he said, if I could clone you, Jane, I would. And it was a real kind of I thought, oh, okay, this is really you've actually given me that boost to say I'm okay, and really helpful. It was just and I think in life sometimes it's those little things that people do, isn't it, at that moment in time, that make the difference.
Yeah, I think, and I don't know what you think actually, but I think as leaders, we need to demonstrate to people that they have agency. So the decisions they make are their decisions. The consequences that come from them, good or bad, is their consequences. But there aren't people who will take responsibility for your own actions. Is that something how you see?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I spent a lot of time, actually, when I arrived here, there was quite a blame culture. And people were frightened of taking responsibility because they were frightened if it didn't work out, that they'd be in terrible trouble. And so I spent quite a bit of time saying to people, I don't mind if you get it wrong, as long as you tell me. As long as we can have those conversations, as long as you're honest and you're doing it for the right reasons, if it goes wrong, we can fix it. But you need to own the problem and talk about it. And I think my sense is that is shifting things, that people start to feel they can. Certainly, people will be quite honest with me. Sometimes you think, what have I started?
You know what? That's that thing when you teach people to challenge you and then they do, and you're like, that's what I wanted.
Oh, good.
That's great. It's going to take longer now. But at least you know that they'll be more aligned. How do you go about, because I'm curious really about this whole blame culture, because I've come across people who kind of take it as, oh,
with a blame culture, like they can do nothing about it. And I also know that when you tell people it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to come and challenge me, they don't believe you straight away. So how did you manage to get rid of the blame culture so effectively at Greenwich?
Okay. I don't think it's gone completely, I should
Right.
say. I think we're on the route of, because I think it's all well and good for me to say that, but if then their line manager doesn't behave like that, then actually change it. So you have to work at all the levels. I think some of it is about actually living what you said you will do.
Yes.
So we did. So we've had a couple of examples here. We had one last year where something really didn't go as you want it to go. It was something that we would never have wanted to happen, but the team were clearly mortified, and their initial reaction was to start telling me, everyone, basically blaming each other. Well, if they hadn't done this, and I just said, I'm not really very interested. Let's find a solution. So we spent a lot of time then saying, okay, how are we going to make this okay? And what are we going to do? And I think the staff afterwards said to me that initially they thought I would come in and shout at them, and I didn't. Then they thought they'd all lose their jobs, and they didn't. Then they thought that, that actually I wouldn't live by what I'd said, that we wouldn't find a solution. And I think the fact that I and then the rest of the senior team are lined up, and we did actually live what we said we would. They have had to take responsibility. They have had to find solution. It has involved them actually doing more work than they'd have had to do if it hadn't gone so wrong. But we've done it together, and I think in answer to your question, I think it's a slow burn. I think it's easy to flip into a blame culture, and for me, I think it's really difficult to flip out of it. And I think then you have to basically live what you've said you'll do. Because if you said there's not going to be a blame culture, you can't shout at people if things go wrong, basically. But I also think you have to be really clear about who's responsible, because I don't think not having a blame culture means that people don't have a responsibility. Because I've always said to people, you can say whatever you like, but you are responsible for what you say. So as long as you're clear on that, I think that's fine.
Yeah, and I was just thinking that there's that fine line between holding people responsible, having a blame culture, and having a learning organisation, isn't it? So there is a fine line between all of those places too.
Yeah, and it easily flips into one and not the other, doesn't it? I agree.
Yeah, and I think
sorry, it's about being a sort of maverick leader, because I've been pondering this. And I'm fascinated by it, because I've been on lots of leadership courses. I ran a business school, and we often used to talk about authentic leadership, and I used to have a real problem with authentic leadership, because I used to think, well, you could be authentic, but you could be a dictator and be authentic.
Yes, that's what I don't like about it.
It really mean that
there might be something seriously wrong with you.
And I was thinking, how does that work? And then then there was a lot, wasn't there, about not being the hero leader and being collaborative, etc. And again, you can be collaborative, and I'm a big fan of being collaborative. But there are moments in life where you have to stand up and take the decisions and be accountable for yourself. So that doesn't. So I was kind of fascinated where the maverick paradox, where it all came from, because it seems to me, and I might be wrong, but it feels to me like you're blending a whole range of sort of values-driven leadership, authentic leadership, collaborative, but it's actually a blend of that, and it feels quite feminized.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because certainly men who use Maverick leadership principles often get kicked back when they first start, because it's not seen as manly, but the results are seen as manly. So it's like, oh, how did that happen? And I think, thank you for that. I think there is that blend. I think it's because I've looked at leadership over, and I was thinking, what is essentially wrong with leadership? Because when I first wrote my book, I thought, right, who do I know who are great leaders that I've personally worked with or trained or disciplined or whatever? And I thought I could only think of 5. And I was like, I have worked with hundreds of people, thousands of people. I can only literally think of 5. And then I'm thinking to myself, what's so common about this? And then I realised that for me, Maverick leadership is all about who you are and what you do. And when you look at leadership, it seems manipulative if you look at the styles that are out there, because it's like, if you can do whatever this magic sauce is, people are going to start doing stuff. But it's all about what you do to that person. And I'm thinking, but there's you as the leader has an impact on it, and how you lead has an impact on it as well. And Maverick leadership is adaptive in nature, and it's like a container. So everybody will do it differently, recognizing that it comes from who you are and what you do, and there's a consistency of that. But it's adaptive, it's contextualized, and I think that what makes it different, because it's something that it'll never change. Because if you think about leaders, often when they were taught, because you go, oh, you were taught in the 19 what's it, because you're doing action-centered leadership, and you were taught in the 60s because you're doing situational leadership. But the world isn't like that. And Maverick leadership is about having thinking models that can adapt to circumstances. So you predict into the future and you future-proof what you do, but you bring people with it. So yeah, it is a fusion of values, but it's also a fusion of execution as well. It's very action-based. That for me is the fundamental difference. And there's responsibility. When I do something, I am doing something, so I have to deal with the consequences. And when you do something, it's up to you. It's not a leadership that says no very often, but it's a leadership that says, okay, if you do that, this is what's going to happen. Can you live with that?
Yeah, and that's the bit that's really interesting, I think, because actually that's the bit that I'm attracted to by what you talk about, because it takes you into a world where you actually have lots of different types of people around you, and you're playing on their strengths, but you're also actually they are taking responsibility for how they then execute what they do.
Yeah, it's a grab you from your comfort zone and pulling you out, but in a safe space. I used to say to people when I mentored them, it's like, you may drop, but I'll catch you on the bounce. It's totally fine. Because there's sometimes people need to just go, don't they? And you're like, it's okay, I still have you. You're not going to crumple at the bottom.
Yeah.
I've still got you. But for this, you need to bounce.
But don't you think everyone needs that experience? Because that's what makes you a better leader, isn't it? If you've done something that has gone really, really wrong, or you've had a role that wasn't for you, or you've applied for something and didn't get it. And actually, it's those experiences you learn from. All the bits where you're really, really great and you think that's fantastic, that's gone brilliantly. You learn a bit, but you don't learn as much.
No, and I think if you see leadership as influence rather than manipulation, it changes everything.
Yeah.
Because manipulation is about, as I say, some of the other leadership models. If I do this, you have to do that because that's the way it works. But if I'm influencing you, I need to make sure that you feel like you're winning as well as I'm winning. And society's winning. It's like a triple win. So if I'm leading, looking for the triple win all the time, then the leadership's going to be better, more aligned, and better executed. And I think there's gosh, you've got me think. I'm supposed to get you to be talking.
Yeah.
I think there's a steel that undercuts that kind of maverick leadership. So it's not all soft and fluffy, because at the end of the day, stuff needs to get done.
Yeah.
Let's listen to a quick advert.
The Maverick Paradox. Judith Germain is an author, speaker, consultant, mentor and trainer, and the leading authority on maverick leadership. She is the founder of the Maverick Paradox, which supports organizations to enhance their leadership capabilities and to help business owners develop and grow their businesses. Judith enables individuals, business owners, and organizations to improve their impact and influence. She is also HR Zone's leadership columnist, and her expert opinion has appeared in national, international, and trade press.
Welcome back to the Maverick Paradox. This is the podcast for the pathologically curious.
You know what? Someone once said to me years and years ago, they were talking. I worked with another colleague, and she's much more experienced than me, but a friend of both of ours she said that when you looked at my other colleague, she said she's quite a scary person, her persona. She said, but underneath she's soft as butter. And she said, Jane, she said, everyone thinks you're lovely and friendly, and underneath it you've got a steel rod. And I thought it's probably fair,
It is fair.
Yeah, because
I think that's true of all socialised mavericks, which is what you are, I would say, as well as a maverick leadership, is because I think it's that, because if you're about action and getting things executing, you're not going to be wishy-washy. And while you can empathise with people, you're not going to sympathise.
Yeah.
And you won't accept excuses, but you will accept mitigation. So it's almost like leadership of nuance, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's fair, isn't it? And I for me, it's about being fair, being true to yourself, but being fair to everybody. So it's about. So I don't think it's about you still need the outcomes. It's the honest truth, isn't it? You just need to find ways that work with people, and they'll be different the ways they work for you.
Yeah, I've always found that amusing when somebody has a great strategy, but they're not keen to implement it, but they're really chuffed the strategies really well. And you just think, yeah, but what's the point of it if you're not going to do it?
Oh, I agree. When we designed the strategy here, I said if it sits on a shelf, it's not a strategy. It's got to be something that people talk about, they live and breathe, and we deliver.
So great leadership has coaching at its base as well as mentoring.
Yeah.
How long do you think it takes to coach change through to somebody?
Oh, interesting question. Yeah. I think it depends whether we're talking about coaching, because in terms of sort of group coaching or individual coaching. But individual coaching, I think I think you would find it very difficult if you had less than a year to see that difference. And probably 2 years would be sensible. Would be my guess. I'd be interested in actually examining whether that's true or not. I'm just thinking really from my own experience, but I also think there's a point with a coach where you can get too close to that coach. I had a brilliant coach, but we became friends. And actually, in the end, I was probably coaching her as much as she was me, and we both acknowledged that. And
that's not good.
And that's good. No, and we stopped at that point. And but the first year of that relationship was incredibly helpful and gave me a lot of confidence, and actually helped me to do exactly what we're talking about, to make those transitions and change. So I think it's about that point, is that it's about recognizing when it's no longer doing that, isn't it? And when it's becoming less dependent, when you're becoming, I suppose it becomes a different type of relationship.
Yeah, I must admit, when I'm mentoring, I quite often that turns into friendship, but it doesn't turn into that person trying to mentor me, because that would be inappropriate. So I think that also comes, as you say, is knowing where your role is. I think that, sometimes people will do a short program of, say, 6 sessions of coaching for a specific thing, and I think they can start as a great catalyst to change, but it needs to continue, or supported by the environment that person's in, whether it's a personal thing or a work thing. The environment needs to support that. But I think you're right, for real behavioural change that's long-standing, it tends to take easily 12 months, 18 months to do. Because I think people forget that even with work stuff, and even if you're concentrating solely on work, there are individual personal stuff that is holding people back. So whether the lack of confidence in work could stem from a lack of confidence because how they have been parenting in the past, and you need to undercut that to move people forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. The coach I had was at a point in my life where I wasn't very confident, and although I think probably internally I knew I could do it, I don't think I knew how to express that to others, and And actually what the coach did was kind of give me space to help me develop myself, which was fantastic. And that type of coaching, I don't think you can do in 3-4 quick sessions. You do need it a bit longer. But actually, then I have used the same person, but I've used them just for one-off sessions.
Yeah.
And that's been helpful as well. So I think sometimes you can see yourself reverting back. It's useful to have a bit of a sort of stop and check.
Well, not everything gets excavated first time round, does it?
No.
Especially if you're focusing on a particular thing that you might only be able to excavate to a level so they can move forward, but it's not all done. Especially if you've given people like homework to do and they don't do it. Then you're like, well, this is the reason we can't move forward, because you didn't look over there and do that.
Yeah.
How has it been for you as a maverick leader in education, in academia?
Well, I think it's been mixed, I think would be the fair, honest truth. So at times I've had a huge amount of freedom, actually, that's allowed me to be that. And at other times I felt very, very constrained. And it hasn't felt like I've had a sort of straight jacket on me and I wanted to shout. And I think that's also about for when I became an associate dean, then I ran a faculty. I was in both cases in the institution I was in. I was the first woman to do that role, and I mean it all before that being white heterosexual men, to put it bluntly, and that was just the reality. So it was a combination of being, as you would describe, a maverick leader, but also being a woman in a very male environment. And so at times that felt very, very constraining. And at other times, actually, I thought, well, I can do what I like, can't I? Because I'm the only woman here. It's fine. And so it sort of did this weird thing where it felt constraining and gave me some freedoms. And also I was really determined that I wouldn't be the only woman in the future. And I wouldn't be the only white person. I thought it was ridiculous that it was all white people in the organisation in leadership roles. I thought it was ridiculous everyone was heterosexual. I just thought we didn't reflect society, and therefore we didn't get the best. If I want to run an organisation, I want to have all the best people around me, and the best people are not all white, and they're not all men, and they're not all heterosexual. So it's felt really important, and also you need people of different ages and. A whole mix really, the diversity. So for me, actually, it was quite helpful, because even when it was restraining, it made me reflect more on what I would want a world in leadership to look like.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about there is cognitive diversity, isn't it? Where you're looking at all types of diversity, whether it's ethnic, whether it's age, whether it's neurotypical.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think there's a bravery in that, to be fair, because I think people shy away because it makes it harder, in the sense that if everybody's the same, then you can apply one size fit all and everyone will just agree or disagree, but it's just easy to deal with. Yeah. But when you've got people with so many different perspectives, it becomes harder. How have you found that in terms of making sure that you can develop organisations that are cognitively diverse without upsetting those who may want it to stay heterogeneous?
Well, I'm not sure that those that want it to stay heterogeneous have always been terribly happy. It's true. But no, I mean, when I came here, I mean, you know Greenwich. I mean, Greenwich is a very diverse institution, and it's very diverse in its student body, and it is increasingly diverse in its staff body. And actually, for me, that brings with it a sort of wealth that you don't get without that. For me, I feel that it's enabled us to progress much quicker. It enables us, we can set people, the fact that people come from problems from such different places, I honestly believe gives us better solutions. I mean, sometimes you get someone who's so far away from where you think that you do think, whoa, where's that come from? And you have to take a few moments to stop and actually stop yourself from saying, no. And you do at times have to create some boundaries. You have to be clear about how far you can go, and you're willing to go at that moment in time. But actually, I think people are okay if you do that. I don't think people mind boundaries as long as they understand why they're there. And I think what I think is really difficult is the next step about how you actually get everybody else to embrace that diversity as well, because it's your point earlier is sometimes it feels safer to have everybody around you that thinks like you. It feels very comforting, but I don't think in today's world that's going to get you the best solutions, and I don't think it's the best way to go. So if you honestly believe that, then you have to accept that there's going to be times where you're really outside your own comfort zone. And I think as a leader, that's healthy.
Yeah, it's really healthy. As you know, I've been with you in Greenwich for 3 years now, watching in the change programs that we're doing there. It's just watching the changes, and it's wonderful to see how much movement has been made and how people are so willing to speak up and say whatever. A lot of psychological safety in there. But I can reflect on certain things that's been said to me in other places, not in Greenwich, where people are like, oh, do we have to be diverse? Can't we just? And it's because, well, what I see that happens there is it's the different. So now I'm seeing it more around neurodiversity. Do we really have to do it this way for autistic people when we want to do it that way because they're a small number? And it's like, well, the number isn't as small as you think. But also I think any type of cognitive diversity, if you can make people feel like they belong, it's better for everybody. And I think what people are missing is that they're thinking that you're making accommodations for neurodiversity or accommodations for Black people, when you're not. You're actually leading really well that everybody benefits from.
Yeah, I don't think it's about accommodations at all. I think it's about enabling people to be themselves in the way that you want to be yourself, and enabling people to feel that actually what they bring to the party is as valid as what anyone else brings.
Yeah, I always think about, because when I'm talking about, say, neurodiversity and autistics, and I'm talking about being aware that they're more likely to be literal and be very clear and not relying on body language. And I always say, and that works for people who are not autistic also. Because wouldn't it be better if, as leaders, we just said what we meant? Yeah. Which is what Maverick Leaders do, which is why they stand out so much, because you'll just say it as it is.
Yeah.
And what you mean.
Yeah, I feel really strongly about that, because when I took on running a faculty years and years ago, nobody in that faculty had any form of appraisal for 6 years. So no one knew whether they were good, how they were getting on. And I inherited a faculty that was being restructured. So I had to sort of carry on with the restructuring. So we had to interview people. Their interviews, in effect, were their 6-year appraisal. And that, of course, is the most terrible thing you can do to someone, because the truth is, somebody, if 6 years ago, if you said to them, do you know what, actually, if you didn't do this and if you developed this, I think you could move into this job. 6 years down the line, they're completely entrenched. You can't do that. And then they're really shocked when they don't get roles, because they think, well, how could that be? I just assumed I'd get it. And I promised myself from that day onwards that I would always be honest with someone if I thought there was an issue, and I would be as transparent as I possibly could be, and I would never, ever allow that to happen, because I just thought it was a terrible thing.
It is a terrible thing.
And I think for me, it's the same as what you're saying. Actually, the more honest you can be, the better outcomes you get. And my experience is people, they don't always like it. They're not going to love it if you say, actually, this program's so, in my world, it'd be about, can we run a program because it's too small? Might be one example. People don't like it when you tell them you can't, but they'd rather you told them than you pretended it was all right, and then suddenly one day it just disappeared.
You know what? That reminds me of my very first HR job, which was a HR manager's job when I worked in this retail organisation. and you have your normal probation period. And what was common in this particular store is that they would hire people, run them ragged for the 12 weeks, and then just fire them and get another lot of people, and didn't do any development and stuff like that. And when I arrived, I kept telling people to do the reviews and stuff. And then I said, if you don't do reviews, I'm not going to dismiss them. And they didn't believe me because I was young and it was my first HR job. Anyway, so it came to dismissal. And I said, bring me their training plans. I didn't have any. And I was like, well, I'm not dismissing them. The rubbish. I goes, how do you know? You've never spoken to them. And it only happened for one cycle. Because I got a lot of flack and I was not liked routinely by any manager for a while. But once they were forced to have that person and then they started training them, they realised that 99% of them were perfect.
Yeah.
And what they were missing, so for them, it was easier because in a food retailer, there's always youngsters that come and go. Mm. But what they weren't really thinking was the impact of that early dismissal could derail them for the rest of their working life. And they just did not think about the individual and what would happen. To be doing a job, you think you're doing well, working really hard, and then you're sacked. And then you have to tell your next employer that you've been dismissed for poor performance.
Yeah.
And I think it's that you have to think of the other person when you're leading.
Yeah, I agree, actually. As you were talking, I was just reflecting on a case, not here, actually, but where I was previously, that was someone who was neurodiverse and quite often got themselves into difficulties because they would say things that were, I suppose, blunter than actually most people were used to dealing with. But actually, they never ever stepped, what I would say, they never stepped over that line of unacceptable. They weren't disrespectful, but they did end up with getting themselves in difficulties, and they ended up in a variety of places, with people putting in complaints. And actually, in many ways, it was the people who put in the complaints that had the problem because they weren't willing to hear someone who was quite so open. And yet it really knocked the confidence. And it actually did make me think about how do you help someone who actually doesn't perhaps have quite those same triggers as others, or same ability to stop and think, what's the impact of that? But actually is saying something that's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, and I think that's one of leadership, isn't it? Because it's totally possible. I think sometimes with neurodiversity, people write them off. Oh, they have ADHD, they do this and they can't help it. All they need is a better form of leadership.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And then things will work out. It's very rare that somebody's unsavable. But as you said, if someone is saying something, and I think that's very mavericky as well, is that maverick leaders will accept a message that's delivered poorly if the fact of it is true.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's like, I don't like the way you said that, but you do have a point.
Yeah.
Whereas I've noticed, I mentioned this in my book, that people who aren't maverick are more upset about the delivery of the message rather than the truth of message. And that's why there can be so much issues with maverick leaders and conformists, because it's like, okay, yes, maybe I should have chatted about your weekend first, but at the end of the day, you didn't deliver that report, and these are the consequences. And it's like, but I didn't like the fact you're not about the weekend. Are you not listening? And there's that kind of language problem. You're laughing there. Is that familiar for you?
Yeah, I think it is. And I was just laughing because I was just thinking of examples where people have said to me, why have you allowed them to speak to you like that? Or why do you let them email you late at night? Or why do you let people, come and tell you so, in your face about what they think about something? And I think, well, they've got a point to make. Let's hear it. Okay. It's not, I don't ever take it personal. It's not a personal attack.
Yes, and that's the difference with maverick leaders, is because it's not, if you are wrong, it's not an identity problem, because you're more concerned with doing the right thing, not being right. So if you find out you're wrong, you're like, oh, okay, I'll do this then. It's not, but your identity isn't tied up in it. And I find sometimes with conformities, their identity is tied up with what they've said. So they won't let go of that opinion because it's who they are. Yeah,
I think that's true. And I've had leaders like that. Yeah. And you think, come on, you're wrong. Change your mind. It's fine to change your mind.
Yeah. Well, I wonder why people are so frightened. Do you think it's based back to being at school? So like you get something, like if you get something wrong, there's a problem. Whereas, because I think that maverick leaders accept being wrong and go, oh, I'll be better next time. But it doesn't stop them from carrying on. With other people seem to be really devastated when they're wrong.
Yeah, I think it's also something about ego, though, isn't it? You know, I have over the years worked with people with huge egos where actually they couldn't countenance somebody telling them they were fundamentally wrong. You know, you'd have to find a way around it. How do you persuade this person that maybe there are alternatives?
That's where the coaching frame comes in, isn't it? When you start to coach people around that. I used to call things like HR by stealth, where you would be doing so you would be coaching, because I remember mentoring this marketing director once, and he was really upset because he couldn't convince the CEO of stuff, and he was like, CEO is always wrong. And I was like, right, explain to me the CEO, let's work out how to get him to accept what you're doing. And at the end of this session he said, so the only way I can get this to happen is for me to change what I'm doing. And I'm like, yep. And he's like, okay then.
Yeah.
Whereas the organisation couldn't get him to change because they used to hit that head on. You have to change, you have to change, you have to change. It's like, I don't want to change. But when you show people the end result, this is how you get what you want, then people are willing to change, aren't they?
Yeah. And also it's understanding how someone reacts and what they're like. I think you need to understand people. You know, if you've got somebody who has got quite a fragile ego and you decide to publicly humiliate them, well, you're pushing them into a corner. They're going to come out fighting. So it's just understanding that, I think.
Yeah, and I think you've mentioned something really important there about the human dynamics. And I know when I used to be in charge of graduates, I used to always send them off before any leadership-y type stuff. I send them off, learn about, influence, people dynamics, body language, how to persuade people. Do all of that first, and then I'll teach you leadership techniques, because if you don't get people, you can't lead.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't read the room and you don't understand where the issues are, you'll never achieve what you've set out to achieve. You might as well spend more time understanding people than anything else, because I think that's ultimately going to serve you huge benefits.
Brilliant.
Let's listen to a quick advert.
The Maverick Paradox Magazine. The Maverick Paradox Magazine is for the pathologically curious. Written by a swagger of socialized mavericks who are divergent thinkers, the magazine tackles the biggest issues affecting maverick leaders today. You might be a business owner or a leader within an organization who wants to have your thinking challenged, to be exposed to a diversity of thought, or to learn from diverse experts in their fields. If so, the Maverick Paradox Magazine is for you. Join the swagger at themaverickparadox.com and engage in the conversation.
Welcome back to the Maverick Paradox. This is the podcast for the pathologically curious.
Before we end, Jane, is there anything that you would like to talk about or share with the audience? I am now leaving it open to decide what you would like to do next.
I suppose one of the things I was reflecting on last night when I was thinking about this podcast was what actually has it felt like? Because I do think it's important to think about what it feels like from your own experience. And for me, I was thinking, what has it felt like being a woman in a often very masculine and male environment? And because I think lots of women don't apply for roles because they're fearful of and I've been there. I've been the one that's waited another 2 years till I could tick every box and apply, and then spotted that about 5 other people often men have applied who didn't tick all those boxes, but not always men, but often. And I suppose for me it's about how do we help other women be and also help actually other people to have that confidence to say, actually, it is okay for me to apply for that job, or I am okay as I am, and I don't have to worry, about what everything else that I'm being told. It's sort of giving people, it's how do we free people up to have more confidence, I suppose, and more resilience. But And I think that's, for me, I suppose the only way the way I've tried to do it in my career is to be honest when I've got things wrong, or to go and talk to people when things haven't worked. I used to do this lecture to staff where I was previously on what happens when you don't get a job you've applied for, and tell them about all my disasters and when I went horribly wrong. And I only used to do it because I was in a senior role, and they all assumed that I'd always got everything I ever went for, and I wanted, it was to try to give people a bit of confidence. But I suppose that's always my reflection, is how do you as a leader not just encourage people, not just coach people, but how do you sometimes, it's almost like take a hand and pull people up, because there's some people, I think, because of their life circumstances, because of the diversity of their backgrounds, will not have that resilience, will not have that confidence. They won't necessarily have role models around them. So it's how do you help someone who isn't like yourself, but actually would be fantastic if only you could help them with that confidence. And that's what I always reflect on, is what can you do? Because I think it also, for some people, it is about almost sponsoring them, giving them a helping hand up the ladder in a way that I think they might not have had in their careers.
Sponsorship is really important, I think. But I think sponsorship is the role of all leaders for everybody that they lead, I think. Yeah, I think this is a really, really good question, because I was thinking about it the other day, actually. Because I think about myself, and I think when I was growing up, we would still be amazed to see black people on TV. I still remember calling my mum, black people on TV. And I could tell them, Michael Jackson, 3 Degrees, hot chocolate, it was, but there wasn't really any black role models. So it enabled me to go, well, I'll just be the first then.
Yeah.
But now, because I'm thinking about people I talk to now, there are lots of different diversity. Not enough, but there is. And then for some reason, that seems to disempower some people, because they're like, there isn't enough people in this space to do, and it's like, it's going to be hard to me, rather than going, well, if there's one, there can be 2, there can be 5, there can be 100. But I don't know what not sure what the difference is, whether it's a difference of attitude, or a difference of time, or a difference of, how you've been educated. Because I think I'm growing up in the 70s in a latchkey, look after yourself. So you would naturally, Generation X, you'd naturally go out and grab stuff, because no one else is going to give it to you. But it's not the same now. So it's interesting. But I think, to answer your question, I wonder if it's one of empowerment. When I'm talking to people about leaders, about leadership or change, or anything like that, you can't think of the moment you need something is the moment you do something. I've got a change program, so now I need to communicate. Well, it's a bit late now. I'm now a leader. I'm going to do this. Well, it's a bit late now. You should be doing it anyway. So if you have an environment that has psychological safety, that you empower people, you give confidence, you sponsor them anyway, then I think people will bubble up, because it's part of the environment, rather than, I think you're right. I think you're an initial catalyst if it's not happened, maybe a program or an awareness day or something. But it should happen as a nuance of leadership anyway, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I also think for some people, their backgrounds will have made them feel that it will never happen to them.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
I observe some people who have potential to be fantastic, but they just lack that confidence, and therefore they never quite come out of that shell. And you're quite right, coaching can do that, sponsorship can do it, but I think sometimes it's spotting that very early on. And I suppose what I would say is I was spotted early on, and someone did help me. And it's how do you actually make sure that you have your antennae out, and that all of your teams have their antennae out to do that as well.
You know what? My HR background immediately goes to, well, you should put that on the appraisal then, and make leaders accountable for that, because then they'll do it. That's what immediately, because whilst that's not the solution, it's an important part of the solution. Because quite often organisations don't have people measures in the objectives, and then wonder why leaders don't people their people. It's like, well, we don't pay them to do that, so they don't see it as important. So every time you say, we're now doing this, they say it isn't an add-on. That's not their real job.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Absolutely, I think we should do that. But I think it's also about how do you help others to have that antennae to be looking out for others? Because that's the other bit of it, isn't it? It's because I can put it in appraisal, but if somebody's not actually really looking beyond what they see initially in front of them, but looking beyond that, are they actually going to see that potential?
Yeah, because it could easily, the same I said about Generation X, you could have Generation managers goes, well, I did it as a matter of course. Not my fault the Gen Zs don't think about it, So you have to take action and strategize on how you're going to make that happen. And quite often you need a catalyst, whether that's a training event, workshops, managers, senior managers huddling down to the gym. Often you need to start a catalyst to get it going, and then it's all about nurturing and continuing it, and having an environment that will support those changes. And I think that's the bit that's missing. I think quite a lot of senior teams forget that their leaders, they themselves, are part of the problem and the solution. And I think senior teams often forget that. They think, if only we just get the rest of the organisation to do this, it will happen. And then when you see the rest of the organisation, they go, if only the exec team would do this, then it would make it easier for us because we're doing all of this and the exec team is beating me up because I'm collaborating or I'm talking to this person, I'm doing that, and they don't like it. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, I think that's very fair.
Brilliant. Is there anything else before we wrap it up for today?
No, I suppose my only final thing would be, I think in life it's actually really important that any bad experience you have, you actually learn from, because actually when you reflect on bad experiences, they can become the best learning experience you've ever had. And I suppose that's, you started, didn't you, saying, how did I, dance? Yeah, what was my dance in a way? And I suppose I am relentlessly positive, and I am by nature. I know I grew up with some people who were clinically depressed, so I'm very, very, very clear that that's not where I am. and for me, I suppose it's about then saying, okay, so if that was a really grim experience at that time, but actually if you learn and take a lot of learning from it, I think you can end up with it feeling like a positive experience, if that makes sense, because I think it's easy in life otherwise to get bogged down with those layers of negativity. And I think for me, it's about how do you rise out of that? And I do think actually if we can all do that, that really helps.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I've noticed when I'm coaching or mentoring someone and there's something that's stopping them from going forward. So you go back a bit and there's this pivotal event that has happened. And sometimes you just have to say, look, what you did to survive that event and what you're doing now was fine. If you hadn't done that, you would not have survived. It's perfectly okay. But now you're in a different situation. It's time to move forward. And what you need to do is you help them to cut the ties from the past, because quite often people keep, as you said, they drag what's happened in the past. And sometimes it's a minor thing or sometimes it's a massive thing.
I agree.
But you just they need help to cut that tie so that they can move forward. And then when it's truly cut, then you can go, oh, because of this, I'm now able to do. And I certainly know that, through the racism I experienced as a child, drove me to answer the question, why do people do that? Why do people, and I know very much, it's a question I've always sought to answer, which is probably why I love psychology so much, is that, people would treat me a certain way without knowing me. And I would be like, why do they do that? And I know that's a question that followed me through life into different areas. Oh, why does that happen? Why does that happen? And that's my question of the why. And I think when you've cut those parts, you can look back and go, because of this, I am now this. And this is great.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I haven't experienced racism, but I grew up in a very poor family because my dad died when I was 5, and I've always knew that. I think has been helpful as well, because actually, you think, what's the worst thing that can happen? Okay, my parent can die. Well, that's happened. Okay, got through that, and then actually as a consequence of then losing our house and having very little money, there was I was treated very differently, and I think it's always that question about, well, why did people do that? Why didn't they just feel really understanding? It was a really dreadful situation, and I think those things can be catalysts, can't they? Because you spend your life really wondering why did it happen in that way, and why was it experienced? But actually it helps you then to try to understand how then other people experience things that aren't great in their lives and what that leads to. So I do think they can really shape how you are.
I mean, that for me, it led me to look at why did groups act in this way different from individuals. It really sent me on this whole social psychology learning stuff based on that. So I totally agree. You know what, Jane, you've been absolutely fantastic today.
Thank you. Well, you've been great too, Jude, and I love it.
I really loved you coming on the show, and thank you out there for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast, where through conversations with our guests, just like Jane, that demonstrate that Maverick leadership exists everywhere. I am your host, Judith Germain, and I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation.
As a leader, you know that having a strong level of influence is essential to achieving your goals. But how do you know if you're truly making an impact? Take the How Influential Are You scorecard to get a clear picture of your current level of influence and identify areas for improvement. With personalised recommendations and valuable strategies, you'll be able to amplify your influence and make a real difference as a leader. Don't miss this opportunity to improve your leadership skills. Take the scorecard now at amplifyyourinfluence.scoreapp.com.